You're listening to the Becoming More Me podcast with me, Theresa Lear Levine. You're already enough. But if you're anything like me, you thrive when you're stretching and developing yourself, creating more of the person you feel called to be. This podcast is here to inspire and support you. Let's release the negative, reinforce the positive, and elevate our vibe together as we tap into our limitless potential to transform and grow. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm excited about today's show because this is really actionable things that you can do for your business that are really going to increase your visibility and also be able to make the most out of what you are creating so that you can get a lot more visibility, traction, exposure, whatever you want to call it, out of the things that you are spending your valuable time and effort to create. So we've been talking about podcasting. We've been talking about visibility. We've been talking about business building in more of the energetic senses and the deep transformational change and ways that it really helps you to grow and develop not only your business, but to balance work and family life and all sorts of other things. There's some really deep conversations to be had around our vulnerability and our willingness to put ourselves out there and what that can do to help us level up for sure. Today, however, we're talking about actual steps that you can take for your own podcast or for your own content creation that are going to make it really make a difference. So I'll preface this by saying a lot of this happened pretty organically for me in other iterations of my business. And as I just wrapped my head around social media and lead generation and all of the different components of business. So there was a time when I spent a ton of time on all of this and did it all myself. I am blessed to have a team these days that helps me with a lot of my creation, but that doesn't mean that you need one in order for this to work for you. Okay. It got to the point for me where I always felt like I was needing to reinvent the wheel, or that if I created something as a video, I had to create something totally different in written format, or that I just always had to be creating. And it left me very little time to actually be in my genius zone of helping people and delivering all the things that I could talk all day about to those people who actually wanted to come and, join me in the form of being my client. So with that in mind, I started to put systems in place. Now, speak to this really quickly because I know that the ADHD brain can be very resistant to that. It can feel really uncomfortable to start putting systems in place. It can feel kind of dull and boring, but ultimately at the end of the day, the more planning and the more organization that I am willing to put into my business, the better everything turns out and the more I can build upon it. Without those systems in place, it is chaos. But this is also covered in other episodes where I talk about the need to slow down in order to gain the traction you need to speed up sometimes. And I find that normally, at least a day out of every week that I have, there is a certain focus on systems, organization, making sure that kind of the slate is clear so that we can move forward the next week, and doing all those things that are not necessarily glamorous and fun, but the things that make all the rest of the time more productive, more focused, and more profitable. So at the end of the day, that's what we're in business for, right? We want to be profitable, make money, have a viable business. And without the planning and support that goes into that, it's really hard to do that because, you can end up wasting hours making a Instagram reel that gets 5 views, or you can just run off on a tangent all over the place. We know how our ADHD brains are. They will do whatever keeps us comfortable. It's that combination of the busy brain plus our subconscious programming will take us off in all different directions. So planning allows us to know what's actually important and then to put the right structures in place to make sure that we follow through on that instead of going off on those different tangents. So that brings me to the way that I use my podcast to create all sorts of content. And originally, and I say this because I know not everybody has a podcast, I just did this when I would create a video for social media or have something that I wanted to teach on or present on. I did this a lot with little 5 to 10 minute videos at first, and they weren't podcasts. But then I realized it was more effective for me to do the podcasts, which then I could also use as 5 or 10 minute videos and so many other things on so many other platforms and get so much more visibility. So just know you don't need to have a podcast. But one of the reasons why I'm sharing about podcasts is because so many of my clients have started podcasts while we're doing work together and have found that it is greatly helpful for them understanding their message to their clients better, greatly helpful for them becoming better speakers, and also in just really fine-tuning all the things that they want to be talking about day in and day out in their businesses so that they can best educate other people, coach other people, be better at it, the practice makes such a difference. And I can say that from a place of experience, having now had my podcast for more than a year. There's all this, talk out there about how once you've done something like a podcast like 50 times, it just really levels up and you get so much better at it. And everything really kind of falls in place in a new way. And I can say 100% that is definitely true. So now that I'm in year 2, and also I've done about just as many guest interviews. So with that in mind, upwards of 100 different times that I've been speaking about things that have helped me become more of who I am, things that are always helping me to become more me. And also a lot of talk about the other things that I specialize in. And when you talk about something day in and day out, you find new ways to talk about it. You figure out what's important. You learn what people want to know more about, what's interesting to people, what may be interesting to only you, and so much more. It's such a cathartic, transformational thing to do it. I recommend it to anybody. And I think that's why so many of my clients have decided to start their own podcasts or channels on things or whatever, because it's how they get better and really begin to excel. So I normally just record my podcasts on Zoom, and you can find video versions of my podcast, and you can find me on all the normal places where people consume podcasts like iTunes, Spotify, that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not going to go into the real nitty gritty specifics of how things get edited and all that kind of stuff, because I'm not the one that does it. My assistants do that these days. And if you have people that are doing work for you and assisting you, then what I can say is that for me, I record my podcast episode and then we use Basecamp, me and my team, and I upload the Zoom files to a specific place in my Google Drive that they have access to. I have a normal list of tasks of which I'm going to share with you here on this podcast that are my normal tasks for taking care of one of my Becoming More Me podcasts. I also have a list of tasks that are my normal tasks for taking care of any kind of guesting that I do or other media appearances so that we can make the most out of those too. Basically, any time that I am speaking in any capacity, it is being recorded in some way and repurposed into more content, which means I don't have to recreate it. And with my team on board and understanding the processes, it means that when I am done recording this episode, I'm going to hand it off to them, a process that only takes me 5 or 10 minutes. And then pretty much everything else is in their hands. Now, if you were going to do it, you would just begin the tasks in there's a bit of a chronological order to things, but there's also, you can crisscross things too. So the first thing that happens is they receive the podcast episode. There's an audio file and there's also the Zoom video. And then, like I said, I have no idea what their processes are for making this sound better than it does when I record it or whatever else. We have an intro that gets added on. We have an outro that gets added on, both audio and video, so that, there'll be a YouTube version of it, there'll be the audio version of it. All of that gets created. That's kind of standard stuff, but it's some of the other things that I do that people are always saying, oh, that's genius, or I need to do that, or whatever, that I really wanted to share with you today. So there's a whole process that we use. And obviously the first thing is that we're going to get the podcast in the right, it's going to get edited so that everything sounds good and everything's ready, so that when we start working with pieces of it, everything's already edited for that. That's important. You don't want to just start doing all the littler tasks when the greater thing isn't done. So actually getting the podcast done, the video ready, all of that is really important. Part of that editing and getting that ready to be put out there is writing the show notes. Those need to get written. You want to make sure that those have great ways for people to get in touch with you, or any access to freebies or things that you gave as resources on your show and that kind of thing. So I normally have specific show notes for each show, as well as kind of standard things that I put on every episode. And that works differently too when I have a guest on my show and I need to get their information. So show notes are kind of you can figure that one out and what those need to be. And then we also transcribe every podcast. So depending on your platform, I use Buzzsprout for my podcast. There's a place where you can actually upload that transcription, which makes it much more searchable when people are looking for certain things, because all of the words that happen and occur in your podcast are searchable. So that's great. But the transcription gets used for other things later on with us as well. So having that done in the beginning is really important. And then the next thing that happens is that my team begins to create content from the episodes. And this is something that it helped that they knew me and they knew what I would want to put back out there and such. Sometimes there's those moments where you say that one thing that everybody needs to hear, and they often turn those into like a quote post. So they could take any old picture of me or a relevant picture that relates to the episode or whatever, and they use Canva and they make it pretty, put the words on it, that kind of thing, create a graphic. Or we just use any old picture and we use that quote as the caption. And that's an easy way to repurpose some things. We also create reels. So reels that can be used on YouTube or on Instagram, and to really kind of give a taste of, what happened during the episode. It might just be a clip, a minute or two clip of it. It might be a montage, whatever speaks to it the best. Now, when I guest, I do a lot of private work with the hosts normally afterwards that they allow me to share to their audience. And oftentimes my assistant will make a montage of that, where in just 1 or 2 minutes, he summarizes the whole thing. And then people can email me to get a copy of the entire private session so that they can do it along with us. But that's a really powerful way to kind of show the entirety of what happened in just a short period of time. But that's a little bit more complicated than just taking a clip, because you can go through your video and take out just a few clips of audio that make sense. And I know that my podcast host, Buzzsprout, actually allows you to download, like they'll create sound bites for you and you can download them and they're like ready to post. It's pretty handy dandy. We tend to zhuzh those up a little bit and make them a bit nicer and more on brand, but it's not necessary. You can get a lot of mileage out of the things that are already done for you. And so just think of all the things that you can repurpose your video and podcast content for on all the different platforms. You can create reels, you can create IGTV content, which would be longer videos. You can have video content for your page or your profile on Facebook. You can have video content for LinkedIn, TikTok, any of the platforms that you are using to drive your business. And for me, I find usually the same video works on all those platforms, but they might need to be different lengths of time, or they might need to be formatted differently. So we use different editing stuff for that in order to make things rectangular or square or whatever else. And that's pretty easy stuff to figure out. But And then the captions, you can usually use similar captions too. But, if I'm posting something in my free Facebook group, the Becoming More Me Community Hub, which anybody can join, by the way. So if you're not in there, you should be. Then I may be asking more questions to engage people and to get more conversation going, because that's more of an intimate conversational environment. And if I'm posting on LinkedIn, I might be trying to appeal more to the business side of things. And if I'm posting on Facebook or Instagram, it may be a little bit more personal. So I just tweak things a little bit, but essentially I can write one caption and then, just angle it a little bit differently for the different platforms, which also means that if the same person is seeing it on multiple platforms, they're not really bored by it, because there's something new and different about the way that it's being presented. And you can use different scheduling sites and platforms to schedule your content, so that once you create it, you can have it ready to go when the podcast is going to release, or you can just manually do it, whatever works better for you. There's tons of different ways that can be done. That's like a whole other podcast episode. Now, with the transcription can be an easy way to locate those parts that you want to pull out of the video just by reading through it, or you can go through the video and edit it that way and find them manually. But the transcription's also great for creating blog posts. If you have a website or a blog, you can create blog posts using snippets of the transcription with very little editing being necessary. The same goes for LinkedIn articles, which get a lot of traction. If you're using LinkedIn, you can basically write the blog post and then you can copy it or use it as a LinkedIn article also. And you can use it as newsletter content. You can also use it as captions on the video content that you create. So all of this is just repurposing, just figuring out how to put it out there. Now, normally when I'm posting video content from an episode, I'm making sure that I'm letting people know the name of the episode number if it's applicable, and where they can find it in the caption. And for me, I have an easy website for my podcast, becomingmoreme.com. And sometimes I'll drop that link in there, because you can find all of my media appearances and all of my own podcast on there without me having to put in a complicated iTunes or Spotify link or something that nobody's ever going to retype, and that usually doesn't get actually linked, where somebody can just, tap on it within a post. So if you have an easy website, that can be nice, or just simply telling people to, go listen to it wherever they enjoy consuming podcasts is helpful too. Or if you have a link in your bio, you can direct people there. Sometimes posts get a lot more traction when you're not throwing a link in them and you're just, making a mention, but it is more work for people to have to go to the link in your bio or to have to go look it up themselves. And, we're not exactly the ADHD community, like people like you that are listening to my podcast, are usually not going to either remember to do it later or take the effort to, do it if it means you've got to go type in a long website or, go figure out how to find it. So make sure they're at least getting the name of the episode and a little bit of information on where to find it. So at this point, you've created video content, you've created a newsletter, a blog post, LinkedIn articles, you've got all sorts of, potential quote posts and things. And there's also YouTube to leverage too. So if you're like me and you record it on Zoom, you have a video version of your podcast that can get out there also. You can create playlists on YouTube with all of your podcasts so that one leads to the next or one recommends another or whatever else. And of course, there's also, stories. So once the podcast airs, you can be posting some of this content that you're creating in your stories on Facebook or Instagram and making sure that it gets out there, or you can be sharing these posts that you're putting in as stories. And in there, you want to definitely be linking a listen now link for your podcast so that people can easily click, tap, whatever, and be listening to it right away. And, there's just so much you can do with this content, guys. So I'm just hoping to inspire you today to realize how many ways you can use this to support your business and your efforts to really, really expand upon them. And of course, if you have a guest that comes on your show, you want to provide them with easy ways to promote. When that show airs, you want to make sure their audience is going to be exposed to it, which then brings more traffic into your podcast and what you're creating as well. So I always like to create a promo kit for guests on my website so that, right around the day that it's going to launch, they're going to have copy they can use to email people that includes links to the website and links to what I'm doing, things like that. And they also are going to have graphics that they can put into an email, graphics they can use on their social media. And then I'll create that video footage and stuff and also share it with them. So they normally get a link to a full Google Drive folder that has content they can share. And then as I post about the episode, I am making sure to tag them as a collaborator so that they can then share that on their profile so easily without even having to post it themselves. So do what you can to make it easy for people to help you promote when it's their episode that they're coming on with you. And you'll get a lot more downloads on your podcast on those weeks because you'll have their email list being targeted and their social media, and it's really, really helpful. And so that brings me to some subtle differences with podcast guesting. Now, if you have your own podcast, or even if you don't, I know I did guesting before I had my own podcast. Some people start their own podcast and then they find themselves guesting. You're probably going to do both at one point or the other, and both are great. So when you're a guest on someone's show, then they're usually the one that's recording it and putting it out there. Now, I haven't found a host that said no yet, that hosts are normally willing, if you tell them how you use stuff, to allow you to record as well. So I normally have the host give me recording privileges also, and I record the show too. Then I let them know, hey, I'm going to have my team piece this out into some great content to promote. I'm obviously not going to release anything before you release the show. And it'll be awesome to be able to promote it. And I normally also, like I said, do some private work after I record with the host. So it just allows me to have the show plus that private work that I then piece out into a gift that I give people who listen to those episodes that just really, really resonates with them and helps them to better understand, in my case, EFT tapping, the breakthroughs that can be made, and so much more. So, thinking about a gift that you can give that is really going to feel personal for the show can be a huge asset also. But so on those guest shows, and I used to just use a screen recording software and record myself when I would do guest episodes before I got the courage up to just ask, hey, can I record it too? And in that case, I would just have video footage of my face and me talking. You could hear the host, but you couldn't see them, but it was really high quality video. And a lot of times the video content that you want to use the most is the parts of you talking if you're trying to promote yourself and, your appearances on shows and things like that. So that can be a nice option also if you're, feeling shy or whatever else. And you don't really need any kind of permission to use footage of yourself talking about stuff. So, but like I said, I've never found that hosts have been reluctant to allow that, especially when I explain, that I'm using it to promote. And if nothing else, I used to record things. I mean, when I first started recording myself, when I would speak on other people's shows, it was literally just like a screen record. So it was like all the mess of my screen. It wasn't anything that I would use again, but I did it just so that I could listen back at the ways that I wanted to improve how I was speaking, how I was delivering things, the stories I was telling, all of that kind of stuff. That's invaluable stuff, guys. You've got to hear yourself so that you can understand all the ums and likes and and weird pauses, or the way that your microphone sounds, or how you're delivering something, or if you could omit something and make it more powerful, or if omitting would make it less powerful, how your voice and intonation are coming across. It's so valuable to listen to yourself from time to time and just understand what's going on there. So I highly recommend that to anybody, but doing it in a way where you can repurpose it too is amazing. I mean, because even if an interview isn't your best, you're probably going to find something from that you're like, this is totally worth resharing. And why recreate the wheel? You've already got it. You've got the recording. It's there, and it's awesome. So I really just highly recommend that to anybody. There's a few other subtle things that you can really do that help with processes with guesting. One is I like to send the podcast host some easy copy paste show notes that they can add to the episode. That way, they don't need to guess at what links I want people to go to or how I want them to contact me or anything else. And it's normally just a few sentences, a few lines, a couple website type things, but it saves them so much time. They don't have to think about it. They can write kind of the unique show notes for our episode and then copy paste in what I send them. And they are usually very appreciative of the ease that that provides. So, be a good friend there and help them make it easier, because that is how they are essentially promoting you. And you also want to make sure that they get it right. And they don't just assume that you want people to go to your website or that you want people to email you or whatever it is. You're giving them the exact way that you want people to contact you, or the exact gift that you want to give their listeners, all of that in just one easy copy paste email that you'll send them with all that information in it. And then in most ways, I handle my guest appearances very similarly to the way I handle my own podcast. And I'm creating media and I'm sending out a newsletter when that podcast releases. I'm creating articles from it, blog posts, newsletter content, all of that. And it comes together very organically. After you've done it a few times and figure out what pieces actually are relevant for your business or the platforms that you use, you can really create a system that is very streamlined, that saves a lot of time, and also be creating stuff that you can use over and over again. Part of the beauty of podcasting is that it has a very long life to it. So this might be an episode that is releasing in summer of 2022, but that doesn't mean that somebody isn't going to find it, listen to it, and enjoy it in a year or 5 years from now. And so that means also that there's no reason why you can't re-promote content and, either link it back to the podcast to get more information to the podcast, or just use it to keep relevant information streaming out to your audience on different platforms. Once you've created it, it can definitely come back around. And that can take people from being able to post, maybe once a day as you begin the process, to being able to post 2 or 3 times a day in a very automated kind of way, where you can maybe just like reschedule the content for, a few months after you post it the first time. And then it starts to build up and you start to really have a very natural creation of content and scheduling that stops taking you so much time, because you're just doing the same thing. You're just creating your weekly or your biweekly or your monthly podcast, whatever you do, as well as guesting in whatever capacity you do that. And then all of that is creating, multiple pieces of content that can be very timeless and very reusable and very evergreen. And that's the whole definition of working smarter and not harder. So I hope that helped you guys. If you have questions for me about my systems, for my team, I have just recently laid all of this out in spreadsheet format so that the different team members know which parts of this puzzle they're responsible for. And we know whether it's one of our Becoming More Me episodes or someplace where I have been a guest, we know by looking at the spreadsheet what's been completed, what still needs to get done, and who's responsible for it. That makes it really easy. For a while, we just had a list that, we knew what we needed to do still, but it was a little harder to be able to understand that it was all done. So highly recommend a spreadsheet. And obviously not all of these things will be relevant to you. And there may be additional things that just naturally come to mind for you that you would want to add in there and do that maybe I don't. And I'd love to hear about things that you have idea-wise. If, you've got ideas outside of this, comment, leave a review on the podcast or send me a message. The hamster wheels are always turning here, and I'm always looking for new ways to make more out of what I'm already doing and to work smarter and not harder. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I look forward to your feedback. I know it was a little bit different than usual, but this is still very much a way that you can become more of who you want to be in this world, also known as Becoming More Me. Have a great day. Thanks so much for listening. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or post on social media and tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave action steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. Keep shining your light.